Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight I'd like to talk about a German veteran named Fritz Kunst, who lived in a neighboring village of my ex-wife in Hessen. So one night I was eating dinner at a guest house with my father-in-law and my ex-wife when somebody mentioned that the Inhaber, der Wirt, that he was a veteran. And so we started talking, and I told him that my dad was at Salerno, and he just disappeared. He just got up and left. And about 10 minutes later, he came back, and he had his photo album there, and he said, I was at Salerno too. And he brought back his tropical helmet. He had a tropical pith helmet, just like this. Now, this wasn't his, okay, but he had it at home, and he was very proud of that. He told me that, I met Fritz, and we became friends, and then I got to go to his house a few times and interview him. So Fritz ended up in the army, and he went into Russia. I remember him talking about his initial engagement in Russia, and he was following the tanks, and then they jumped into a trench, and he said he was walking through the trench, and he turned the corner, and there was 3 Russians sitting there, and he said it just scared him so bad. He said he shat himself. He said he really did. And he said that those Russians were dead, that they'd been killed by concussion. He said they looked like they were alive, and they're just sitting there. Nobody had fallen over. He said it looked like everything was normal, but they were dead. He said concussion must have killed them because there wasn't a mark on their body. He talked about being in Russia and how brutal it was. I remember him talking about being in the listening post on the out in front of their position, and he said that some guy came up to relieve him, and he said, "Fritz, I got a bad feeling. Don't make me relieve you. I don't want to stay. Let me go back to the company." And Fritz said, "Hey, I've been out here all day. Come on, it's my turn to be relieved. Take the position." And he said that night that the Russians made a push, and he said that guy got killed. And he talked about that a lot. And he talked about how tore up the guy's body was. And he said when he came home that the guy's wife visited Fritz, and she asked what had happened. And he said, "Well, what do you know?" And she said, "Well, the commanding officer wrote me a letter." And he said, "Well, let me read it." And he read it, and he goes, "Yeah, that's what happened." And he said it was a very merciful letter, that the commanding officer had said that the guy didn't feel anything, that he had just received a headshot, that he just was killed just like that. Where in reality, apparently he had like his left shoulder torn off, and he was in a lot of pain. He was screaming and hollering. In any event, Fritz ended up volunteering for the Africa Corps. And he talked about how he took all the shots and passed all the physicals and things like that. And he was kitted out in his Africa uniform when he went home to visit his parents before he left for Africa. And that's when he left his tropical helmet at home. He forgot his tropical helmet. So that's why he still had that. He didn't take it with him. So he said he went south on the train, and he got as far as Sicily when Africa fell. And so he was no longer needed in Africa. And at that point, he just started retreating up the boot of Italy. And he told me he was at Salerno. He said he was a vorgeschobene Beobachter für den Nebeltruppen. He was a forward observer for the Screaming Mimes at Salerno. And he talked about being on the mountain, I guess around 424, the commanding heights, but he talked about being on the mountain with binoculars and a radio, and he said he would call in fire missions. And he said, I could see the landing craft coming in, and those little boats, he said, they'd hit the beach, and some of them would drive up on the beach. He said it was very strange that this boat could drive up. They were the ducks. He said that this little boat could drive up on the land and then drive like a vehicle. And he talked about the other boats and all the men running out of them. And he said he could see that they were putting together like a dump somewhere. And he called in a fire mission on that. and I believe it was in the British sector, and he talked about it burned for days. He said it blew up and blew up. It must have been a munitions dump. But I remember him dropping his head and looking at the floor and him saying, I wonder how many men I killed with that. You could see the remorse in his body language, and I mean, he wasn't happy about it. So Fritz, one time when I was visiting him, he pulled these two items out. This is his mess kit, which has his name scratched onto it, and this is his canteen. And he told me that he carried these in combat at Salerno. He wore these in combat against my dad, and he gave those to me. So I'm very happy to be able to display them. And I created this German soldier in honor of Fritz Kunst. He's an enlisted man. He's in the smoke troops. He's got a newly kitted out tropical uniform of the latter version, the third variation, like what they would have got right before Africa would have fallen. So Fritz, he retreated up the boot. He talked about being at the Po River. Lots of Germans that were in Italy talk about the Po River. Apparently that was a big barrier for them to cross. And by the time that they were trying to retreat across it, they had fallen apart and they didn't have any organization. It was basically every man for himself. Remember him talking about trying to get across the Po River, and they were planes strafing the guys, but he made it across. It was like on an inner tube or something like that he went across. And he said when he came back to his town, it was a little village outside of Wetzlar. I just can't think of the name of it right now. But he said when he came back, got off the train, he said everything was just devastated. There was nothing left. He said that it was basically gone. And he told me that he was born in 1922 and that he was the only man from his village that was born in 1922 that returned, that all the other kids that were born in 22 were killed. So in honor of Fritz Kunst, he was the Wirt at Die Kanone was the name of his restaurant or his guest house. They had good food. I remember eating Jägerschnitzel mit Spätzle und Champignon, Feldjägerschnitzel. Anyway, so in honor of Fritz Kunst, the forward observer for the Screaming Mimes at Salerno, glad he didn't get my dad on a fire mission. I actually stood up on the hill, 424, the commanding heights there, and wow, when you look down at the beach, you can see everything. I mean, you can see cars, you can see people. I mean, I can see how if you're a forward observer, it would be a target-rich environment because anything that moves down there, you can see it. So it had to be taken. Lest we forget museum, Fritz Kunst, signing off.